Hello, welcome to Technology Trends, a television program about ancient history and new technology. I'm your host, Patrick Bailey. Today we continue our series on symbolism, and we are going to talk about the subversive use of sacred symbolism in the media. And once again we have as our very special guest Michael Tsarion, who speaks on this topic here in the Bay Area and internationally. Mike, once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. Nice to be here.
Although this is a continuing series, I believe this is segment 5, why don't we summarize for the audience what is this particular topic and how did you get interested in it?
Well, I've always, as we spoke on other programs, I've always been interested in symbolism in its context to mystical practice and yoga and mythology and astrotheology. But there is also, in Ireland, where I started getting interested in this, I came across certain scholars who had written about the fact that there is such a thing as subliminal advertising, for instance in billboards and magazines. Many American writers of great esteem and academic qualifications have written on the subject. For instance, Brian Wilson Key, you may have heard of him. He wrote a wonderful book called Subliminal Seduction and Age of Manipulation. Then you have an American back in the 50s called Vance Packard, who wrote extensively on the fact that Madison Avenue media giants and some of the great monopolies are implanting aesthetically conditioning motifs, politically conditioning motifs in their advertisements. And then Gene Kilborn, also an activist from the 60s, who has written extensively on this, and also about the denigration of the female in the media, which I'm sure we should all be familiar with, how both women and the youth and even animals are treated in advertising commercially and so on. And that opened a door for me because I didn't first myself realize that there was a connection between the mythologies of the world, and the great high symbolisms, the great arts, and this corporate side. But they started to converge, and it became a big interest. Specifically, when I discovered that not only is there such a thing as subliminal persuasion, but that many of the devices and the machinery of subliminal persuasion is very occult. I studied the occult my whole life, and suddenly, almost with a kind of a shock in a way, to discover that there is occult symbolism, and the word occult meaning hidden, of course, that's all the word really means, but coming out even out of the magical societies. So I actually discovered when I was about 15 that actually sacred symbolism that once, before the industrial age, going back in time, symbolism that was designed and meant to uplift our soul, uplift our spirit, is actually now being used for quite the reverse. And that a sacred symbolism, like a star for instance, will be put onto a product. Then we are having this emotional and symbiotic and even spiritual response to something, but actually it's based on it's an appetite. It's to motivate the appetites, not the spirit. So this is what happens, and I found that this was a pernicious phenomena in our society, and tried to set about doing something to make people savvy and aware that great power symbols coming out of the ancient matriarchal and Egyptian cultures, for instance, and the Semitic line, what have you, these are now being used in the corporate world to negative effect, and it is having a negative effect on our dreams and on our unconscious.
Wow. And you give workshops nationally on this topic?
Yeah, this is a very, of all the things that I do teach, this is the one that people are very fascinated with and respond to very strongly, because it's like taking a large weight off the shoulders when you realize that this is what's going on. And of course, you see, people see symbolisms all the time: magazines, billboards, on the sides of buses, on the clothes that we wear. I mean, they're absolutely everywhere. But because they are separated by time and space, I mean, they're out there in the ambiance, in the atmosphere, you don't see the underlying themes. So I started with just by cutting things out of magazines, for instance. What happens is, if you pool them together, if you bring a lot of the symbolism together, like the symbol of the sun or the symbol of the pyramid or what have you, then it's easier for them to see the underlying theme. When you're driving in the car and you're out there, it's very difficult to see any underlying pattern. It's just a bunch of symbolism polluting the airwaves and polluting the atmosphere and the ambiance. But when you condense it, then people really do accept that there is a theme, there is an agenda, and there's similar motifs that are being used just by a few elite monopolies.
Well, most people are completely unaware of this, and they would probably think at first glance that this might even be silly. So what is the response for someone who actually learns your teachings or sees this program? What would be the normal response?
Well, I think that if they really give it proper thought and really think about it, is so innocuous. You know, Conan Doyle said, if you want to put something in hiding, if you want to hide something or disguise it, you put it where it's most obvious. You put it in plain sight. And this is an idea that we have to sharpen what I call our symbolic cognition, or symbolic literacy. It's really about part of our spiritual growth, but you see, spiritual growth is twofold. You can build up your light body, you can develop your religious and spiritual sensibility, but that's like cleaning up a room where the garbage is still being thrown on the floor. So your cleaning process is kind of redundant. The spiritual process is both anabolic and catabolic. At the same time as you're building up your own wisdom body, you have to have a hand on keeping out the negative. You know, and Schopenhauer has written on this, that our consciousness is just besieged with stimuli. We need to be also making sure that that ceases to come in. So a lot of people have a healthy interest in building up their level of purity and their level of wisdom. I don't doubt that that sensibility, that desire is there in everyone. But then why, after 2,000 years, is there hardly any result? Mm-hmm. It's because we have been taught, or we've been conditioned to forget about a very important part of spiritual development, which is the physical capability, the skill, if you will, of keeping out all the debris. That's part of it.
Well, we have over 100 examples, mm-hmm. and the slides that are coming up of examples of this.
That's right. I have brought some slides, and I'd like to get into that. And I'd also like to say that in regards to response, mm-hmm. I find that children, because I do teach children this in the New Age Academy in Berkeley, for instance, I teach a class there on communications and this kind of thing. This response with children is especially strong, because they are being taught right now to consider that it is absolutely chic to be wearing corporate logos from head to toe, you see. But the slides that I have brought with me, I'd like to be pointing out, making it very clear that America, for instance, the occult presence in America is very strong. From the earliest days of the founding of America, we have personalities and we have symbolism, some sacred symbolism, even in the architecture of cities and so on. And we have an occult presence, people involved in fraternities and secret societies. And this gentleman, Albert Pike, was one of those personalities. He was the man who created the Scottish Rite Freemasonic Lodge system throughout America. He was a disciple of Giuseppe Manzini, and Giuseppe Manzini was a disciple of Adam Weishaupt, who was the head of the Illuminati in the 17th century. It turns out on May 1st, 1776, we have an order coming out of Bavaria called the Illuminati, and it's interesting that America's birthday is July 4th, 1776. So two very important events take place in 1776. One is the forming of a super secret society in the world, run by Adam Weishaupt, and then we have the founding of America. So there is a connection, and there has been a very strong occult presence in Europe, but of course also in America. And people may not actually realize just how close to home that presence is. For instance, Martin Luther, who we do recognize as being the founder of Lutheranism and eventually the Protestant faith, on the original manuscripts that Martin Luther wrote in, which you can still visit in, I think, Wittenberg or Worms in Germany, and so on, you will see on the front cover of the manuals that Martin Luther used the symbol of the Rose Cross, which is an occult symbol relating to the Rosicrucian fraternity. And coming specifically to America and its connection to symbolism and Freemasonry, this Freemasonic presence is the presence that brought many symbols out of the past. So the column, when we see buildings, these beautiful Renaissance style white buildings in civic centers, the idea of the column and even the obelisk represented actually the polar axis of the Earth. So things that we see every day represented something of an occult property to do with astronomy and astrology. The column being the symbol of the polar axis of the planet Earth. And the column was actually the symbol, the phallic symbol of the ancient god of the earth. And that is why it is often, you will see the obelisk in proximity with a round lake or a round pool of water representing the female, you see. And here is a picture, a photograph of your Congress, and in the background, if I could draw your attention, the whole room is actually designed based on occult geometry, but specifically in the back on either side of the American flag are two symbols. It's not too clear there, but what they are, and you also find this on the dime, is what we call a fasces. It's a bundle of rods with an axe in the center. And this is where we get the word fascist from, in fact. The word fascist comes from the word fasces, which is a Roman symbol coming out of the ancient past. So those are two profoundly occult symbols. And the very fact that there are 3 tiers there, that the representative is sitting 3 tiers high, has a lot to do with Freemasonry and the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry.
That's right.
And why I'm bothering to explain this is because this is the background of the symbolism, so that later when we find out how it permeates into the corporate world, we have to understand who would put it there. That symbolism is very much at the heart of things that are very close to us today, which is government, business, education, and advertising. And one of the most important of Freemasonic symbols is what we call the checkered floor, or the floor of the house. And you'll often hear that euphemism said by politicians when they say, would the speaker come to the floor of the house? That term is Masonic and has to do with the checkerboard. Here we see the same image on an apron, which Freemasons wear, and there you have the eye and the symbol of the sun. We're going to get to the symbol of the sun. So important occult symbols flourishing. And here's, again, like you asked, if people have resistance to this, well, they may as well realize that most of the founding fathers were heavily involved in Freemasonry. And I'm not saying that Freemasonry is anything negative per se, but it is very symbol rich. It is not a religion, it is a theocracy, a theology, or a theosophy. It is an occult fraternity, and it is steeped in ancient symbolism coming out of the ancient past. And as we said, the floor and the checkerboard, one application that we do see, because remember what hides behind the doors of secret fraternities we're not usually privy to, but I will draw your attention to the fact that police officers throughout the Western world have the checkerboard on their hats. And you will see the symbol, and many of the other symbols that are worn by the police and by the Navy and by the Army are actually symbols from Freemasonry. They're just showing you that they officiate for Freemasonry. In fact, in this country, your police cars are even black and white. And we don't have time to go into the entire symbolism connected to that, of course. But there are people like Jordan Maxwell who specialize in this. And the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry are actually called the blue degrees, and that is one of the reasons why the United Nations, some of the costumes and uniforms that police and Navy and nurses and so on wear in society are that color. There's a special kind of color. And what I'd like to point out also, of course, is the fact that the ground plan of many of the cities of the Western world, you see, are actually based on sacred geometry, occult metaphysical geometry, and astrology. And in fact, in America, this is a layout of Washington, D.C., it turns out that Washington, D.C. has 22 zodiacs incorporated into the architecture of the city. This is more than any other place in the world. Even in London, there's only 4, friezes or zodiacs. In one city alone in America, of course, America's lots of cities have pyramids and obelisks and sphinxes and what have you. But Washington is based on occult geometry, and it has 22 zodiacs within the layout of the city itself.
That's a square and compass from Freemasonry.
Yes.
On the side there.
Yeah, this is a view of Freemasonry, and some scholars have gone into this with great depth. One of them is a man who recently wrote a book on this. This kind of research has gone back many hundreds of years, but for convenience sake, a man has written an absolutely magnificent tome, and his name is David Obeson. He wrote a book called The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital. And this book, you see, lends credibility to what people like myself have been saying for decades. And in this book, he goes to the memoirs, to the journals, to the letters between the founding fathers and the architects and the statesmen of this country, and proves that they were interested in these topics, these occult premises. And here again, and even the namings of certain places, like Shooter's Hill and Alexandria. These are places in Washington, D.C., the layout of the streets and so on. In fact, the chief Masonic Hall in Washington, D.C., and some people say throughout America, is actually on a hill in Washington called Shooter's Hill. Now, this innocuous name would be passed by a lot of people until we realize that the word shooters is a euphemism for the sign of Sagittarius. And many things, as I said, government buildings within Washington, D.C., like the 7 main buildings, are aligned with constellations. Many cities of the Western world are. And specifically, the Masonic Hall is aligned with the constellation of Sagittarius, and even the name of the hill it's sitting on is a veiled, cryptic euphemism for Shooter's Hill, because the sign of Sagittarius has been known as the archer or the shooter. And Sagittarius is an extremely important sign of the zodiac. And what I'm talking about here is not your regular, a natal newspaper type of astrology. This is occult astrology. And Sagittarius is extremely important. And the archer, his arrow is actually facing the very center of our galaxy. The reason why he has a bow and arrow is because the arrow is facing a certain target. Well, what target? Constellation of Sagittarius is where the center of our galaxy is. So our whole solar system is spiraling towards a place very close to the sign of Sagittarius. But more importantly, if you look at this photograph, in the top right hand corner there is another gigantic constellation, even bigger than Sagittarius, and this constellation is massive, and it straddles the signs of Scorpio and Sagittarius. And no astrologer, very few astrologers ever draw attention to this, but in occultism is a very, very important constellation, and it's called Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, and it is known as the 13th sign of the zodiac. And this 13th sign is of extreme importance in occult and Freemasonic ritual. And many of the things that we see, like the design of courtrooms, for instance, other anecdotes connected to the number 13, many assassinations, believe it or not. For instance, I can give you one example, is President Kennedy's assassination was on November 22nd. This happens to occupy, in calendrical and astrological calendar, the sign of the 13th sign of the zodiac. This is why we have the magistrate in a court being the 13th juror. You have 12 lesser jurors and the 13th sign, the 13th person. And you go into a precinct, you see, which is outside the normal laws of causality. You are now in what they call the area of the black sun, out of the normal passing of time and space, and into the place of judgment where you're going to be judged. And Sagittarius as a sign, astrologers will know, is very connected to the concept of justice and judgment and civic authority, you see. So lots and lots of symbolism connected there. In Freemasonry we have the symbol of the pentagon, or the pentacle. That's a star, and this of course, the symbol of the star you find on corporate logos just all over the place. Later on we'll get into that. And the colors of the 5 elements. The number 5, it has a lot of occult properties, and it has really nothing to do with black magic like a lot of people think. But we do find that again turning up in very familiar areas, like the police badge you see and so on. And in fact, when you do get arrested, you're brought in and they say that you broke the law. The very term breaking the law goes back to the Mosaic or Talmudic law and breaking the law. And many sheriff's badges and all are 6-sided, just like the Star of David, which people of the Hebrew persuasion will recognize, but that is not a Hebrew symbol. That is a symbol going back to the Aryan cults of India. It's a symbol that predates Western understanding. It originally was a symbol of the sun, and then the Semites picked it up and made it a symbol of the planet Saturn. But we're still seeing occult symbolism in very obvious places in the world. Here is a Medal of Honor that is given to nobility and given to people of merit, and again the symbol of the eagle and the pentacle.
It says it's the Medal of Honor, so this is a positive thing, but the pentagram is upside down. Does that mean anything?
No, actually this is erroneous. Christians point to the fact that the inverted pentacle is negative, or the number 666 is negative, black cats are evil, the number 13 is evil, and so on. Basically, in my studies I realized that, you see, our inheritance is the great ancient symbolisms coming out of the past, and when we're working with that kind of symbolism we're enriched and empowered. But when Christianity and the Orthodox religions came along, they had to demonize all of this stuff to remove us from our central power so that they could then assume control. Let me make it absolutely fundamentally clear to answer that very good question that you just asked, and that is that no symbol in itself is negative. No number, no color, no symbol is in itself a negative, has any negative meaning. It is who is using it and for what for that makes it negative.
And the what for might change with time.
And of course it does, depending on your agenda. But no symbol, I don't care if it's a reverse crucifix or an upside down pentacle, no symbol in itself has negative properties. So on, you know, but it's who's using it and for what for is the answer to that. Here is a group called the Shriners that are well established in America, again using Egyptian symbolism, you see. And the American flag is an occult symbol. It has stars on it. People look at this every day and never think about the symbolism that went into the colors or the choice, or why there are 4 short stripes of red and 3 long stripes, how the number 13 and the number 51 appear so often on the star, you see. And here's an even better example, is the California flag, which always shows the grizzly and the star. And just like the communist flag, you have the red star, and there's not 1 in a million people can tell you why the symbol of the bear is on the California flag. Most people will say, oh, well, that's the indigenous animal of such and such. And that is not the case. Again, the answer is to be found in astrology, because the bear with the star above it relates to Ursa Major, the bear that's floating up there. Yes, the 7 stars of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, and the red star is, of course, the pole star, Polaris. That is the real symbolism behind the California flag. It is an occult symbol with astrological information. And from that wonderful book, Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, is a wonderful statement here. And I think that the implications of what he says here are absolutely incredible. When found in a text, the star determined or indicated to a reader that the group of hieroglyphs associated with it was related to spiritual matters. It was related to the heavens, to invisible energies, which the Greeks called etheric. Now, as I say, what he's saying here is amazing, because the symbol of the star is found on the clothes of generals, it is found on the hellish machines of war, it is found in the designs of cities, and it is as on flags, absolutely countless thousands of flags. And this person is pointing out why you find it on these symbols. Talking about astrology, here's another very famous symbol of the lion and the unicorn, which is seen on heraldry and flags and insignias and even products all over the place. How many people realize that this is to do with the royal houses? When the sun ascends to its most northerly position in the zodiac, it's in the houses of Cancer and Leo. Well, that's what the heraldry is showing. The symbol of the red lion is the symbol of Leo, and the pale white unicorn represented the moon, and the moon relates to the house of Cancer. Now, people who are Cancers by birth sign think that their symbol is the crab. That is a very modern adaptation. The original symbol of Cancer was the scarabus beetle, the Egyptian scarabus beetle, which later gets corrupted into the crab. Or, even more as a purist, it's the white pale unicorn. So that is what you're looking at when you see this symbol on royalty. It's actually an astrological symbol. And in fact, many cities are designed on the circle of the zodiac. Here's St. Peter's, where you have enormous amount of symbolism having to do with the stellar positions of heavens. You find in the clock towers, for instance, there's always a clock tower, you know, and usually the face of the clock is so high up. I mean, what purpose could it? Nobody can see it to tell the time, so why do you have it? Well, the big bends of the world and these clocks are to indicate that sidereal time is becoming terrestrialized. It's the transmittance of heavenly time into earthly time. And then even when they don't have a clock, they'll have a place called Times Square. Or Thames River, the river Thames. All goes back to the same principle. Here is the geometry of a circle that represented the zodiac. So whenever you see any of these columns and obelisks, just realize that they're placed on geomantic power points to enhance energy. They're not just commemoration stones, they're markers that are often aligned with the mountains and the surrounding topography, or aligned with the heavens. And you find them all over the world, not just in Egypt, but in the modern cities, even in Paris. We have the famous Eiffel Tower, you see. And these stately homes and these stately buildings, it requires an awful lot of geometry to build them, coming out of the ancient world.
Some of them may have been moved to their present position from a sacred position.
Yes, or even built on top of more primitive Celtic sites. Not so much in America, but in England you'll find that the location was at one point a very sacred druidic or site for other religions. But absolutely make no doubt about it, the thinking and the thought that went into this and the designs all have a meaning. And then when you look at it, because it's in our space, when you look at it or when you go there, it's having a registering effect on your consciousness. And that effect can be very positive, or it can be also very negative, attributing to many pernicious vices that we have. And it's very interesting too, the connection with Egypt. Their most sacred star was the star Sirius. Because why was it sacred? Is because their year opened with Sirius. When Sirius rose in July in the sign of Virgo Leo at that time, then the Egyptians had what they called the opening of the year. But the hieroglyphic for the planet Sirius, meaning when they wanted to write the symbol of Sirius, they used a pentagram, an obelisk, and an oval. Those were the symbols of the planet Sirius in Egypt. Now, isn't it interesting that in Washington, D.C., we have exactly that, but not as a hieroglyphic, but actually carved in stone in the city of Washington. We have a pentagon. People have always wondered why on earth was that shape ever created in the first place. Well, now we have the answer. Not far away, we have the Washington Monument, which is the obelisk. And then we have a place called the Oval Office. those three structures actually, in stone, on the topography of America, are actually a hieroglyph for the star Sirius. So one might ask, what is actually going on here?
Serious business.
Serious business, yeah. Now here we have another wonderful statement from that book. It says that the extraordinary truth is that the very existence of the Washington Monument is intimately linked with the Egyptian star Sirius, that the ancients represented in their sacred hieroglyphics as an obelisk as well as a star. How is it possible that this most important star of the ancient world should find itself, as it were, resurrected in the architecture of the United States? And this one we have, it says, in the course of that day, when the cornerstone of the Washington Monument was laid, the sun would have actually passed over Sirius. So not only was this the architects involved in commemorating the star Sirius, but we find that even with the laying of the cornerstone of Washington Monument, the sun was literally passing over the star Sirius. How come we didn't learn that in the history books? The Declaration of Independence. It says that computations clearly show that on the day of the Declaration of Independence was agreed in Philadelphia, the sun was on Sirius again. Of course, that's a coincidence, right? Now, Philadelphia, the very word Delphi, Phila meaning love of, Delphi, wisdom. There's a whole concept there going back to the oracle at Delphi. And then we have a statement that says that the Mason who first signed the Declaration of Independence would have been aware of the particular significance of July 4th as a cosmic event. The day was the second in the so-called dog days, which begin on July 3rd. So even the signing of the Declaration of Independence one day before, or even the day of birth of America, what are the dog days? Well, that is because, again, they refer to the rising of the star Sirius. So we're only touching on something here, and yet we've already got tremendous significance. And you'll find obelisks and domes and ovals all over the world, very close to observatories that have to do with the stars. These images are all over the place. Another concept coming out of Freemasonry is the idea of the Royal Arch. And of course that's why you have arches in all the main cities of the world. And in fact, people may have noticed it in front of a civic building or a United Nations building or what have you. You'll see the symbol of three flags. You know, three flagpoles. That seemingly innocuous symbol there of three flagpoles goes back to Egypt again, because their hieroglyphic of three flags actually meant neter, which was the word for the gods. So that's why you find it in front of government buildings, because often the people in the government buildings think of themselves literally as the new gods or the controllers. In a previous show that I was on with you, we pointed out the occult significance of the dollar sign, which is really, of course, the cleverly designed Isis
pushed together.
Pushed together, and of course, if you look at the symbol of Isis, the rods and the serpent, or sorry, the S is the serpent, and the two vertical lines, seen another way, really represent the caduceus of Hermes, which the medical profession are using. You see, there's a similarity there. Many scholars have been talking about the symbolism on the $1 bill, and there is a tremendous symbolism on it. Instead of trying to earn one might want to take one out and just look at it and study one and ask yourself a question of what kind of symbolism is on it, and why is an Egyptian pyramid and so on a dollar bill. And we have a very famous symbol of the eagle. And the eagle, I mean, the symbolism that goes into this is just incredibly deep, and it's beyond the scope of this presentation, but the eagle is the symbol of America because it has to do with the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio is a very large area of sky. It has 30 degrees in it, like all the signs, but there's many constellations there, and the most important one to the ancient people that actually used to symbolize Scorpio in ancient times, not anymore, was the sign of Aquila, the eagle. If you open a book on the planispheres, you will see a sign, a constellation called Aquila the eagle. And Scorpio, as astrologers know, has to do with power and money. And that's why it is a symbol of America, and that's why it's on a dollar bill.
And we note the 13 blue stars and within the circle.
And it also has 13 little berries in the leaves, 13 leaves, 13 lines, 13 tail feathers, 13 arrows. The symbol of 13, again, because it has to do with the precinct, the 13th sign of the zodiac, which occultists know all about. The 13 levels of the pyramid and the eye above it. Because the Freemasons that I'm talking about are not the what we call the speculative Freemasons who come in generally from ordinary professions, well-meaning charitable people. It's not those Freemasons that I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about the bloodline Freemasons who are by bloodline connected to these oligarchical forces coming out of the ancient world. And that's in fact why the 14th level of the pyramid is divided from the pyramid, to show that there's a difference between the accepted or speculative Freemasons, who are ordinary people like you and I, and then you have these power-mongering oligarchs who they think of themselves as being separate. It is these individuals that are responsible for the bringing in of occult symbols of this magnitude, you see.
What does that say at the bottom there? Novus Ordo?
Ordo Seclorum is New Order of the Worlds, or the New World Order. That term comes from the Romans, who believed that they were bringing a new order to the world. And there's much talk today, again, about why this euphemism has been used in politics. But again, that's outside the scope of this present presentation. What it really has to do with is the fact that there was an old world order and a new world order. That when America was founded, it was considered that there was a separation now from what we call the land of the old world structure, financially and economically and religiously, and America signaled a new world order. And the pyramid, again, you see, is a signal, a very important symbol with the eye in it, the eye on the pyramid. And this is like a zodiac circle, the seal of the United States. Circles like this often represented a magical circle or magical precinct, you see, or the zodiac itself.
With 13 letters on the
Yes.
inner track?
Indeed, yes. Charles Taze Russell, for instance, people who think this is all way beyond anything that they will ever become exposed to, that is not true, because individuals in America, famous people, Charles Taze Russell, who's considered the head of the Mormon Church, was buried under an Illuminati pyramid with Freemasonic symbols. He was a Freemason. Most of the religions of the world are actually controlled by Freemasonry or have some connection to it, to some secret society. Here again, for within a year of Washington's death, it was recognized that the great man would most fittingly be memorialized by means of a massive pyramid. In the years following the Revolution, the Masonic fraternities held ceremonial layings for such new enterprises as bridges, locks, universities, government buildings, state houses, memorials, and even churches. Such buildings were aligned with the stars and with the spiritual beings who ruled the stars. Now that's an interesting statement. Although a survey of the foundation charts used in the early phase of the building of Washington, D.C. reveals that the importance of astrology, and indeed confirms beyond doubt that astrology played an important role in the early Masonic rites, the rationale of astrology was rarely discussed openly, even in Masonic documents. And then he continues to say, knowledge of the stars, insofar as they were understood in Masonic circles, was preserved as secrets best left to those with specialist knowledge of such things. That basically means that it was concealed from the ordinary people by the historians because it was very secret, and they didn't want to expose that this stuff was going on behind the scenes.
And kept it also from regular Freemasons.
Right, absolutely. The tradition, and why? What would be the point of doing all this, going to these millions of dollars of expense? Well, he suggests here that the tradition of a godlike tutelary city ruler was much older than this idea of planetary intelligences. The ancient records indicate that it was a practice in former ages for the mystery centers that directed civilization to hand out newly founded cities to the care of specific spiritual beings. So by aligning things to certain stars, they were absolutely making the cities into ritual sites. So what we have to understand, and what is key, which a point that I'd like to bring out every time I talk on this, is that a city is a ritual site. When you see a magician standing within a circle in these old images of the magician within his circle, within his precinct, we are in one by being inside a city which is designed according to these layouts with this stellar and sidereal symbolism. Whether you know it or not, you are participating in a ritual that you don't know exists. So certain assassinations, certain events that take place, ceremonies, erections of this, openings of that, it is part of a much greater ritual that we are not privy to. That's a very important point. And he says here again, the practice of assigning places to the rule of specific zodiological signs, and thus in medieval times to spiritual beings, is very ancient and has been extended to modern times. Since the discovery of America, we are able to trace most of the sources for the zodiological rulerships ascribed to the cities of the United States. So now people have proven that each city in America can in fact be traced to its divine overlord, or its symbolic, tutelary spirit. Perhaps it is sufficient that we recognize as true the medieval arcane notion that such beings could be invited to participate in the life of a city by means of the spiritual art of astrology. Now this is from the works of the Founding Fathers. more down to earth, we have this idea of the Statue of Liberty. People have recognized this. This picture doesn't show it, but the Statue of Liberty actually stands on a peculiar eight-pointed star. Even the pedestal which the statue sits on is very curious. But for now, I just want to bring out 2 points. One is the headdress. This, even though the Liberty statue is Grecian in decoration, the goddess that it is showing is not Grecian or French. It is Egyptian. The goddess on the right there is actually called Sechet, and we get our number 7 from her. And the 7 crowns, or the 7 rays, is Egyptian. And then the thing that she's holding there is the flame of liberty, they say. Well, that is Grecian, and that actually comes from an object called the Palladium. And this was passed on from one dying civilization to a new one. So when we see the Statue of Liberty holding the flame of the new world, there's a very great significance as to why that is. And we find that symbol of the flame on gas stations and many other areas. The President Kennedy's tomb, I believe, has one of these palladiums, and people will see it commonly. One of the most beloved symbols of Freemasonry is the compass and the set, or the square. Where does that come from? It is a symbol of the meeting of the earth god and the sky goddess. And the phallus, or the male member of the earth god, is the obelisk, and the overarching night sky. That is the symbol behind the compass and the G. And G in the middle represents generation. Now this has many, many symbols. It also means geometry, of course, but it has to do with a symbol of the coming together of the male and the female, the god of the earth and the goddess of the sky, going way back to Egypt. And then talking about corporate logos more specifically, here we have the compass turning up covertly, or as a designer, in the symbol of the car Acura. In fact, the word Acura comes from Mercury, Macura. Cars are often named after gods, like for speed. So Mercury was the winged god, you see, the winged feet. So Acura is a shortened version used in ancient times for Mercury, actually. And the compass just shows who is in control of that company, or Masonic. The Malta cross, in hoc signo victe, which is in this sign I shall conquer, with the crown and the cross, is a very famous Masonic symbol. Here it's the Knights of Columbus, also use the Malta cross. Very famous symbol. Where do we find it? We also find it on the Nazis, who were nothing more than a front for Masonic lodges and for the Illuminati, using the eagle from Egypt, the skull and bones, and the oak leaves of the Druids. You see, these are all occult symbols. In America, you have the cavalry using the 2 acorns on their hats, and you'll always see oak leaves on the French generals, on the Soviet generals. You will see the oak leaves. How come they're all enemies and yet they all use the same symbolism? Because they're only enemies in front of us. Behind the scenes, they're very much part of the same group. And the Knight of Malta cross is found then on the gas station Arco. One thing I teach the children also when it comes to symbolism is be very wary. You know, when you're in the early stages, it's a little bit hard to get a grip on this. So one of the rules of thumb is, if you see a word that generally doesn't mean anything in English, pay a special attention to it, because 90% of the logos in front of us and product logos don't mean anything in English, but they do in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, or one of the great magical languages. Arco is a case in point. All you need to add to that letter, or that word, is the letter N at the end, and it will make the word Archon, and Archon means the fallen angels. The word Arco means the fallen ones, or the fallen angels, or the keepers of light. Exon has the Knights of Malta, a cross. That double X there is actually a Masonic symbol, as a man on the right, a knight. It's called the Cross of Lorraine, the double cross. The Cross of Lorraine. Here we have the 5-pointed hexagram again, or the 5-pointed star with the crescent moon. Here are various symbols again from Freemasonry, as the dove. The dove is very important. You find it on heraldry and here on royal standards, with the Knights of Malta cross on the left and the dove. And the Spanish word for dove is Columban, or Columbanus. So when you have the District of Columbia, Columbia Pictures, British Columbia, you see, or Columbine High School, for instance, there's something being told to us. It has to do with the dove and a secret society connected to the symbol of the dove. The black horse, which people often see, and if you watch media a lot, if you watch television, you'll see the symbol of the black horse being used in sitcoms and in all sorts of dramas. You'll see a bookend, or a very common symbol. You find it on cars. You find it on the Lloyd's Stock Exchange in England. You find it on Wellcome, the pharmaceutical giant. You find it, the symbol of the black horse, on the Maserati, or is it Ferrari, for instance. And many, many corporations have the symbol of the black horse. It is another symbol for a secret society coming out of Italy, the Illuminati and so on. And what they're doing is they're playing on a symbol. The word in Latin for horse is caballus. So the word Kabbalah, you see, is what the pun. It's a pun intended to be the Kabbalists. Kabbalah is a tenet of secret societies. Then we have a phenomenon called the double-headed eagle, which when it was first used represented the Roman Empire and the Roman Emperor religion of Constantine, the Catholic religion on one hand, and then the empire on the other. These are the two world powers coming together. Today you can say it means other things, left versus right or east versus west and so on. But it is a symbol used by Freemasonry, the double-headed eagle. And the eagle, again, as I said, is found all over the America as a symbol. Here is the CIA. And then we have it in the moon, when the euphemism was that the eagle had landed. That is occult phraseology, by the way. That is occult terminology, having to do with the money that brought this project into existence, is money coming out of Europe, actually, and connecting to the Roman dynasties. And in fact, did you know that the Vatican actually own all the observatories and solar telescopes in the world? Every piece of intelligence that comes from any observatory passes Vatican intelligence before it reaches the public. So there's a reason why they said that the eagle has landed. It has to do with symbolism, not of the Catholic Church as we know it, but of the principles behind it. We actually find at the moon landing itself, something very curious happened that is not known. It says here from this book that what is not widely known is that alongside the national flag, Buzz Aldrin also carried a Masonic banner. This had been embroidered especially for this strange journey by the librarian of the Masonic House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. So before we all know the commemoration and the ceremony of the American flag, right? But what we don't know, that a very long and elaborate ceremony was held before the cameras were even rolling to signify the Masonic presence on the moon. So we have to realize that there's something going on behind the veil of national security and behind the veil of government. And the symbol of the eagle, as I said, not only comes from Rome, but goes before that back to the solar cults into Egypt. And in politics we hear this phrase used a lot, the left wing and the right wing. Well, I asked a question that if you're left wing here and you're left wing there, then you must be left and right wing of something. What are we? You must have something in the middle. Well, what is in the middle is the pyramid or the sun, because left wing and right wing is a term going back many thousands of years, having to do with the wings of the god Horus and of the pharaoh. It's an Egyptian terminology. Your left wing and right wing of a central sun. And the double keys are zodiological. The Christian church used the symbol of the keys, but this actually has to do with the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which face each other and are considered the gates of the zodiac, or the gates of the sun. Now that 13th sign we spoke about is of great interest for another reason, and that is that the galactic center, which is positioned near the 13th sign, that is called in arcane lore the Black Sun. It's referred to actually as the Black Sun. Sometimes Saturn, but mainly this other phenomenon called the Black Sun. And that symbol at the top right is actually the symbol of the Smithsonian Institute. Why would they be using a black sun? Then the Black Sun, did you know that the Nazi swastika there actually was also known as the Black Sun? That's what it symbolizes. The swastika, people mistake it as being a symbol of the sun. I mean, it might pass for that, but actually its occult roots go back to galactic center, that around which everything spirals.
I do know that the elite of the SS and the Nazi Party, the intelligent ones,
yes,
the scientists belong to something called the Black Sun Society.
That's absolutely right.
Within the SS, and that's where they supposedly developed anti-gravity devices under the Vril Corporation.
Oh yes, this money has been in existence from the first centuries AD. We see it as the pantomime show of different groups. But believe me, the Thule Society and the group that you spoke of and the Knights of the Order of the Temple is very important to find out what the symbolism relates to, and it has to do with astrology. In fact, the Nazi journal was called Zenith. One of their publications, which was featured astrology a lot, was actually called Zenith or Zenith.
Zenith.
Yeah.
The highest.
The highest. The Black Sun is seen here in England at a government building. Above the head of this government building, Bracken House, you see not only a zodiac, but again a black sun. People mistake that as the symbol of the sun. It is not the symbol of the sun, it is the symbol of galactic center, a completely different archetype altogether. Dana is one of the most important symbols of Freemasonry, and you see this on product logos and on charitable institutions all over the place, is the rose, the symbol of the red rose. That's used an awful lot, coming out of Tudor England, because the Masonic orders of the world, the secret societies, got enormous patronage at the time of the Elizabethan age. And in fact, some people reverse that and say, no, the Elizabethan age, the Tudor dynasty, was actually funded by these secret societies, so you can take your pick. But many of your even American parties, they use the symbol of the elephant, I believe, for one of them, and the ass is used, the donkey, the symbol.
Donkey.
These are astrological, yeah, these are astrological symbols. The elephant goes back to the Brahmins of India. People have not discovered the connection between the Brahmins of India and we even refer to the rich people in this country as Brahmins. And well, the elephant is a symbol going back to India and to the Brahmin caste. Here's a symbol of the owl, which was originally sacred to the goddess Minerva, and before her to Lilith, an ancient occult symbol of wisdom, being used by a super secret order here that all your presidents belong to, called the Bohemian Club. And this is and of course you had owl pharmacies not so far back. And in corporate logos you'll often see the symbol of the handshake. Just remember, when you see the symbol of the handshake used on TV or in a commercial, it has very important connections going back to Freemasonry, because the symbol of the handshake is of great significance there. And Masons refer to what they do as the craft. They are members of the craft. But then we have products and logos that we pick up every day that seem to bear the same name. We have politicians making what we call mudras, or sacred hand signals, because they belong to these secret societies. This is Bill Clinton making the sign where he raises the Apollo and the Mercury finger to signify to other brethren that of what's going on. I have Sam Giancana and people in the mafia. I have the mayor of New York and many personalities in the media using the same symbol. We just don't have time to show them all today.
I noticed that after he was elected.
Oh, yeah, sure. Hand symbols have been used. Churchill's V, Prince Charles, the royal family, all your prime ministers use them vehemently. Richard Nixon would use the V shape copiously. And this goes back. This is not something new. As we see George Washington here, that symbol that George Washington is making is the symbol of Baphomet, with the hands that are raised, one hand raised, one hand down, is actually the symbol of an occult god. So let it be known that America is very much steeped in symbolism. The raising of the V has to do with the 33rd degree Freemasonry. Your two fingers were divided into 3 sections, you see. And the 33rd degree is to do with Freemasonry. That's what that symbol originally comes from. And we find the 33 again on the symbol of NATO, or the United Nations. If you count that grid, not only do you have the old laurel leaves of the Roman Empire, because as I said, the Roman Empire is not something dead, it still exists in a mutated form in the New World Order. But if you count the sections of the grid in that encompasses the whole Earth, it has 33 compartments.
4 times 8 plus 1.
Right. So the 33 are involved in controlling the structure of the world. Here we have the communist flag, the Soviet flag, and again, very familiar symbol, but not too many people have realized that these are Druidic symbols. The old story that the sickle represents the farmers and the hammer represents the shipyard is not quite the true story here. What you have here is the sickle is the symbol of the Druids, the symbol of the moon, and the silver sickle. The hammer is a specific kind of hammer, that's called a gavel, that is used by Freemasons. And the star is, of course, the occult star. Remember, anytime you see the star, it is taking what it is on to a higher level, to an etheric or magical principle. Pirates, for instance, use the symbol of the skull and the bones. This is another secret fraternity that exists throughout the world. And it's in America, in the Yale University. This lodge is called Lodge 322. And 322 has been long misunderstood. Actually, what it relates to is March 22nd, the first day of the spring equinox.
That's good.
And here we have John Kennedy speaking about secret fraternities. He says, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the danger of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the danger which are cited to justify it. So on the very highest level of presidency and in this country, there's awareness that there are secret societies operating in the world. In fact, if that wasn't the case, why is it that the police have a group called the Criminal Conspiracies Division? The police actually have an investigative body called the Criminal Conspiracies Division, implying that there is such a thing as criminal conspiracy. Thomas Jefferson says, "I really look with commiseration over the great body of my fellow citizens who, reading newspapers, live and die in the belief that they have known something of what has been passing in their times." So as I'm saying, we have to start gaining the symbolic literacy and begin to see through the veil of what's been going on. And Benjamin Disraeli, he was the first Hebrew Prime Minister of England, a man who spent his whole life trying to expose these groups. He said that the government of this country has not only to deal with governments, kings and ministers, but also with secret societies, elements which must be taken into account, you see, which at the last moment can bring our plans to nothing, which have agents everywhere, who incite assassinations and can, if necessary, lead a massacre. And that is exactly what they have been doing.
What year was that?
I guess that was, that's a good question, early 19th century?
19th century. It's probably
Or
worse
sorry,
today.
I'm sorry, early 20th century.
20th century.
Yeah, the turn of the century.
And now we have the internet with secret encryption codes.
Mm-hmm. Well, here we have a wonderful statement way back in the 15th century by Sir Thomas More, and he says, "Everywhere do I perceive a certain conspiracy of rich men seeking their own advantage under that name and pretext of the Commonwealth." So these secret societies are thousands of years old, and the symbolism that they have is thousands of years old. So now we know who's doing what. Let's find out what they're doing, and we want to look a little bit at the beginning, at least, of the symbolism that permeates the corporate world. And what I'd like to again reaffirm and make clear is that it has a lot to do with astrology. Astrology is the template behind a lot of the symbols that we see in daily life. I tell the children at the New Age Academy and other youth that I associate with in this subject to, instead of becoming cynical, I say to them, instead of becoming a cynic, be a critic.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than being cynical about your society, be a cynic. And the most important underlying common denominator is the night sky. Astrology and the night sky is where a lot of these symbols, these Sabian symbols, come from. For instance, we know about the constellations. We know that there's constellation of Leo and the constellation of Cancer, for instance. As I showed earlier, that has to do with heraldry. But these symbols, that's where they come from. The images that come out of the ancient world of the 12 signs, and you see there is actually more than 12 signs of the zodiac. There's actually 72 signs altogether. If you
over the sphere.
Yeah, over the sphere, there's 72 major signs, and the advertising agents know all about the intricacy of these signs. Which is why when we see them, we don't necessarily at first think that they connect to planets. The Volvo symbol being the symbol of Mars, you see, which represents the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
But see, the word Volvo is Scandinavian for the woman's vulva. So we have the female and the male being put together. The ring of Saturn with a triple A, the ring of Saturn. We have Kron, K-R-O-N, which is a Bay Area channel. It comes from the word Kronos, which means time. And if you actually look at the symbolism they use on that channel and that program, you will see a lot of interesting zodiological symbols there. Arista, which is a record company, a massive conglomerate, is actually the ancient name of the star Spica in Virgo. Virgo. It has to relate to the sign of Virgo. The NATO symbol of the four directions of the four corners. You see, so people need to look at these innocuous symbols and discover that they have an ancient origin, and therefore they have a power. They have a power over our minds, over our consciousness. 4-star goes back to the fact that astronomy and astrology would not even be possible without 4 what they call fixed stars. Okay, so there are 4 fixed stars that astronomers know about, and that's why we keep seeing this term being used, 4 points or forester. Even when you see a certain car called the Forester, what you're actually looking at there actually says 4-star.
This is just really fascinating.
Yeah. So we have a lot of symbolism to show, but I'd like to point out the fact that these symbols have a power over our consciousness, over our being, over our minds, and we can be controlled by them rather than being empowered. In ancient days, symbolism was to help us become empowered as opposed to inundated with stimuli. So if you look at the products, if you're just a lay person at this, and you look at the symbols that we have in our society, if you go to the local store, you will find that a lot of the symbols and the words and the names that are picked are not even English. Redken, what does that mean? Merck, Lexus, right? We use these terms, we say them, they're not even English words, and we assume that they don't mean anything.
And the courses that you teach, your website, I believe, is going to come up here very shortly. People can contact you, find out about the courses?
Absolutely. I teach on this extensively, and you can contact me if you like by phone or by my email, which is neater@jps.net. You can visit my website at taroscopes.com. But I do welcome comments and interest, and if there are anyone who has a fascination with this, as I say, this has been a work that many scholars in America have written about. And I think our time has come, because youth who consider it, completely chic now to dress around like a corporate logo need to be discovering what it is they're wearing and where the origins of these symbols are.
And for further information about this show or other shows on technology trends, you can contact us here at Post Office Box 487 in Mountain View, California, 94042. Post Office Box 487, Mountain View, California, 94042. Well, to conclude this segment of the show, I'd like to say that the symbols seem to have a power that's in our consciousness, and it's the application of those symbols we have to watch out for.
Yeah.
The symbol by itself is neither positive nor negative.
I'm very glad you brought that out again. It has to do with the fact that communication by words is very recent in the phylogenetic advent of human race.
Okay.
But symbolic communication is very ancient, and we need to become literate again, because there's a lot of enrichment and empowerment in that.
Okay.
Especially for the youth.
Very good. Thank you very much, Michael Tsarion, and thank you for being with us here on Technology Trends.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.